Morning, everybody. Welcome to the Transportation Committee meeting for the Sacramento Council of Governments. It's 10:01 in the morning. I'd like to call this committee meeting to order. Jessica, would you mind please reading the public comment for folks? Or how folks can engage in our meeting?
Yes, I can read some housekeeping reminders before we get started here. Yeah. Just a reminder to those tuning in that this meeting is being recorded and will be available to view on SACOG's website after the meeting. For any members of the public who wish to make a comment today, you can notify us by selecting raise hand or by pressing *9 if calling in by phone. All public comment will be limited to 3 minutes each. To help with timing, I will give the speaker a 1-minute warning. Lastly, for our committee, please remember to mute yourselves until you are ready to speak, as this will help eliminate any background noise. And when you are ready to speak, please use the raise hand feature or press *9 if phoning in to alert the chair.
All right.
Ready for roll call?
Ready. Go ahead. Thank you.
Okay. Director Bradford?
Here.
Thank you. Branscombe?
Good morning. Here.
Thank you. Desmond?
Here.
Ledesma for Guerrero?
Here.
Jennings?
I'm here.
Joyner?
Here.
Taylor?
Here.
Chenier?
Here.
Vice Chair Sander?
Here.
Vice Chair Spokley?
Here.
Chair Soon?
Here.
And ex officio member Tacker for Bennett Paul.
Good morning, I'm here.
Thank you. And apologies, Chair Soon, I skipped over our time for
okay.
Pledge of Allegiance.
Yeah, that's all right. I just rolled with it. That's fine. Okay, so I'm standing already, but if you all will join me and stand wherever you are, can we get the flag up? Oh, fantastic. Okay, and ready, hand over heart, ready, pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Great. Thank you very much. Okay. And for the public committee, the committee on items not on the agenda, please do so at this time. Is there anybody, Jessica, do we have anybody in the wait room or in the chat?
It doesn't look like anyone has raised their hand for public comment.
Okay, seeing none, then I'm going to move to the consent calendar. On the consent, does any of the board members have any questions or comments on the consent? Do you see any, Jessica?
No directors nor any attendees are raising their hand for comment.
Okay, I was gonna ask that.
Saylor moves approval of consent.
Okay, Director
Jennings
Saylor.
will second.
Okay, thank you. Could we get a roll call vote, please?
Yes, please prepare to indicate your vote when I call your name. Director Bradford?
Aye.
Thank you. Branscombe?
Aye.
Desmond?
Aye.
Ledesma for Guerrero?
Aye.
Jennings?
Aye.
Joyner?
Aye.
Taylor?
Aye.
Chenier?
Aye.
Vice Chair Sander?
Aye.
Vice Chair Spokley?
Yes.
Chair Soon?
Aye.
Motion carries.
All right, thank you very much. We'll move on to the action items. Item 6, programming of federal fiscal year 2021 apportionments of Federal Transit Administration. Barbara Van Bechtel. Good morning.
Good morning, everyone. Again, Barbara Von Bechtold. I'm part of the transit team here at SACOG. And recently, the FTA released the complete federal fiscal year 2021 apportionments for both Section 5307, which are urban transit funds, and 5339 funds, which are capital funds for transit. And this allows staff to move forward to program these funds And all these funds are available to our transit operators in the Sacramento urbanized area. And we have a list of the operators here in the staff report. We have attachment A, which shows an awards breakdown using the methodology that back in 2014, all of our operators and the applicable local jurisdictions approved. 88% of these FTA formula funds are distributed based on a performance or service-based earned share, with the other 12% be later programmed on a biennial process that we use in the discretionary share, and that'll come to you later this fiscal year. We'll be going out with a call for projects shortly for that. So the recommendation is that the Transportation Committee recommends the board program the FTA Section 5307 and FTA 5339 earned share apportionments for our transit operators in the Sacramento urbanized area, and then direct the executive director to initiate the discretionary share programming process I mentioned of that other 12%, and then staff will return for that board consideration and action later this fiscal year. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Great, thank you, Barbara. Are there any questions from the directors?
Just a simple question. How do we determine the rules for that biennial application process? I mean, if we as SACOG do not delve into transit very often, but this would seem to be an opportunity. Have we given that away to the transit operators among themselves, or do we as a board have any say in what that looks like, that competition?
The board actually approved the discretionary programming process that we use for that, and the scoring criteria that we use to score the applications that we receive for the discretionary process. Okay. The board does have oversight over that.
Yeah, I might just add, Barbara is absolutely correct, Director Sander, but if it is committee's interest, we could always bring this back for consideration. I mean, it will delay a bit, perhaps a month on the application process. It typically involves us soliciting applications from our transit community for projects, but if it is the interest of the committee and board, we certainly could have a discussion at the April Transportation Committee about those guidelines and what's, as Barbara said, was previously approved, but perhaps there's some questions or interest in opening it up.
And when did we approve those? How long ago?
We approved those in 2015 after the memorandum of understanding was approved by all of our transit operators and jurisdictions.
I see. So it's been a while.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, colleagues, I just see transit's in a period of enormous flux. I want to be sure that our transit operators are responding to the opportunities as opposed to being driven by momentum of past decisions. So that's sort of just the context for my thought about this.
It's a fair point, Vice Chair Sander, and hopefully we'll be able to tease that out later today in our information session as well. We talk about next gen transit. Are there any other questions from the directors?
Chair Soon, I think that
Director Saylor?
This is Saylor. I think that David makes a good point, and I don't want to delay things that are essential to move forward, but I think that reviewing a 2006-year-old formula is probably not unreasonable.
Yeah,
I might add too, there's a unique opportunity, directors, because in addition to this relatively small discretionary share, which is just about $8 million in the pot, is that, as you may have been following the news in Congress, right, that large stimulus bill that's moving through Congress, that's the House has approved, it's going forward right now, that does include yet another tranche of stimulus transit funding. Barbara's about to describe some of the how we're going to spend the current $43 million, but that there is even more money. So it will be the third round of transit funding that will be coming to us, and there is some discretion, some policy discretion for our board to consider how such funds are made. So if we were to tee up a April discussion for the directors on both the discretionary program, that small pot of money that our program manager Barbara was just describing, we could that conversation will be very helpful in informing and guiding us on a policy framework for that other round, the next round, the third round of federal stimulus for transit that will be north of $100 million. So it would be a timely discussion. Just a small point of clarification, the earned share formula and the discretionary share was adopted by the board in 2014, and then, as Barbara said, it's 2015 is when the guidelines were last updated. But 6 years, as I think everyone's pointed out, is very much a long time ago, given some of the things you'll hear about today in our next generation transit study about new opportunities and new challenges.
Yeah, and it's not just the time, it's just going through the pandemic as well and how it's affecting the future of work for all of us and how people might use transit in the future. So very good points brought up, directors. Jessica, if there's no other, and I apologize, directors, I can't see all of you on the screen, but Jessica, if there's no other questions from the directors, can we see if there's any questions from the public?
Yes, there. I haven't seen any raised hands from directors, nor am I seeing any raised hands from members of the public. So no comment.
Okay, thank you.
Chair Soon, do you mind if I
Yeah, James.
weigh in here?
Sure.
And I'm trying to sort of take a step back. The first thing I'd say is for your second transportation committee meeting of the year, I really appreciate, especially some of our newer directors and some of our veteran directors really weighing in and asking questions. Director Bradford, thank you for your, asked some excellent questions this week about why is this the split the way it is, and how is this based? Is it population? Is it sales tax share? Director Desmond and I had a good conversation yesterday about just basics, right? Of how does the funding round work? How does money get distributed? And I think for such a new, really a new board of directors, I, as your executive director, want to keep encouraging you to ask those questions, right? Why are we doing it this way? Have we always done it this way? Is there a different way to do it, right? I would also say, in my observations, my time here, we often come to you with some transit allocations, and you don't hear a lot of controversy. And part of that is because the transit operators and our staff and Barbara and Mike Rawson and Matt Carpenter and many others actually do a lot of work behind the scenes to actually get consensus and bring you consensus, right? I do want to be very, I'm going to give some recognition to the staff work that goes in sometimes, that you're not hearing a lot of controversy, in part because there has been a lot of good staff work in advance of this. But that said, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't actually ask the questions of how long have we done it this way? Is there a different way to do it? Pandemic, future of mass transit. And I want to connect that too to the information item that you'll hear, so you get your ears up, from Chris Doherty on next generation transit, right? Which is all about what is the future of public transit in our region and how can we do it differently, and how do we have to get ahead of the massive changes that are afoot. So we appreciate your questions. I think I want to keep encouraging the committee to ask those. Sometimes there are formulas that can be revisited. Other times it is a result of excellent staff work and consensus that we have done in advance of these meetings. But anyway, I just want to say I think this is the right level of discussion as we're still early on in the year in the new board here. So
thank you, James. With that, directors, I'm going to bring it back for a conversation and take any motions at this time as well.
Well, if Mr. Chairman, if we want to bring the topic of allocation algorithm and back for discussion in April, would we defer action on this recommendation until then, or how would that work?
Well, I would have minds that we need to abide by, so I'm going to ask Ms. von Bechtold about that first.
I believe the question was about the discretionary portion of the funds, which is the 12%. We can definitely bring that back for the committee and board consideration in April to discuss the process that we use to distribute those funds. The earned share, the larger portion of the funds, there is a set performance-based methodology that was approved of by all the operators. I'm not sure if the group wants to discuss everything, including that methodology, or just the discretionary portion of the funds being distributed.
Is there a time frame though that we need to obligate these funds or award these funds?
There isn't a time frame. I just know the operators, need these funds. Most of the operators can use these funds, at least a portion of them, for operating, and they need those funds to continue operating their services.
Yeah,
So
I might add, Barbara's exactly right, and those are great points she raises. The one thing I just want to suggest about the timeliness, as you see in your staff report, it's actually 2 action items in that, and so the simple solution would be to defer action on item 2, which is the discretionary program that Barbara described. But to the point about whether or not to take action today on the earn share, it is, as Barbara was just highlighting, it is a time, because this is the end of the federal fiscal year, and we finally got these apportionments from FTA. Given how hard it is to balance budgets right now for transit operators, there is an eagerness, right, to have action on the earn share portion of this. They all tie back to an MOU that we can certainly open up. It will take some time to revisit all of that, but I would suggest directors at least consider the urgency for some of these operators to see some money flowing on the current fiscal year funds. So I said from a staff side, we would see value in moving forward. Action number 1, describe the memo to confirm that the earn share formulas, that we can then work with our transit operators on the grants they need to do with FTA. And as you know, with the FTA, there's a lot of steps ahead between now and the end of the fiscal year for them. So if that could flow to them, I know we'd have a happy transit community, but then we would open up in April both the discretionary share program that Barbara described very well, plus it would be a very timely discussion to talk about what's going to be more than $100 million in addition coming to our transit community this spring from federal stimulus.
Okay, if that's given that, I would make a motion to move forward with the earned share apportionment and hold the discretionary element until we have the discussion in April.
I'll second that.
Okay, I have a motion from Director Saylor and a second from, I believe that was Director Sanders.
Desmond.
Oh, Desmond, excuse me. Yeah, sorry. I'm just trying to guess voices right now.
Right.
Okay. Could we do a roll call vote, please?
Yes. Director Bradford,
Aye.
Branscombe,
Aye.
Desmond,
Aye.
Ledesma for Guerrero,
Aye.
Jennings.
Aye.
Thank you. Joyner,
Aye.
Saylor,
Aye.
Chenier, Vice Chair Sander,
Aye.
Vice Chair Spokley,
Yes.
Chair Soon.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Okay, thank you very much. Continuing on, the next item, continuing on with federal transit, we have a Federal Transit Administration Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act Stimulus Funding Program for the SACOG region. Ms. Von Bechtold, you're still up again.
All right, I'm going to call this Chrissa because that's a really long name. For the stimulus that was passed at the end of December, it brought $14 billion to eligible transit recipients nationwide in the Sacramento urbanized area, which is how these funds are distributed by urban area, or to the state for more rural areas. For SACOG, we programmed the funds for the Sacramento urbanized area and received $42 million for our region. And to distribute those funds, as you can see in the staff report, we actually use that performance-based earn share calculation after conferring with our Transit Coordinating Committee transit operator members. We actually presented this to them at their last Transit Coordinating Committee meeting in February, and the group unanimously decided to go forward with the draft CRISA funding that we have on your attachment A for this item. You can see the different amounts going to the operators. And these funds are available to our operators. These are Section FTA 5307 funds. Again, those are urbanized transit funds. We will return later. There's also 5310, which is mobility funds for seniors and people with disabilities, and 5311, which are rural transit funds. We'll come back later for your approval for those funds. These funds are offered 100% federal share, so no match is required from our operators as it would normally be for regular FTA funds. And these funds also do not lapse. They will be available to the transit operators until they are fully expended. With that, we'd like the Transportation Committee to recommend to the board that you authorize $27 million in programming of the region's available CRISA funds from the Federal Transit Administration to the Sacramento urbanized area transit agencies. They're identified also in the table in your staff report. And then authorize programming of an additional $15 million that comes to the region. The formula is partially based on 5307, that urbanized transit funds. The other portion, 35% approximately, are based on FTA 5337 rail program funds. And the Transit Coordinating Committee group agreed that since Sacramento Regional Transit District is the only operator in our region that has rail, that those funds go to Sacramento Regional Transit District. And then third, make the programming conditional on the funding recipients continuing to support COVID emergency transportation services in their service district through at least the end of the Governor of California's executive order for this crisis. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have about this item.
Transit agencies. Any questions from the directors? Seeing none. Anybody from the public, Jessica?
No public comment.
I'm happy to move.
Okay. Okay, moved by Director Chenier. And I'll second it then if I'm hearing none. We do a roll call vote, please.
Yes, please prepare to give your answer when I call your name. Director Bradford,
Aye.
Branscombe,
Aye.
Desmond.
Aye.
I'm sorry, Desmond, can you
Oh,
repeat?
aye, sorry.
Thank you. Ledesma for Guerrero.
Aye.
Jennings,
Aye.
Joyner.
Aye.
Taylor,
Aye.
Chenier,
Aye.
Vice Chair Sander,
Aye.
Vice Chair Spokley,
Yes.
Chair Soon.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to go ahead and move to the information portion of our agenda. The next generation transit strategy for the SACOG region. Mr. Doherty, we've been awaiting you.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair and members of the committee. Chris Doherty with the transportation team here at SACOG. Give me a second while I share my screen here. Again, the item before you is the next generation transit study. I'm joined today by Autumn Bernstein from our consultant ARUP and also Mike Rawson from our transit team.
Good morning.
Can you see the PowerPoint at this point?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
Thank you.
Sure.
Appreciate that. So again, the item we're discussing is an information item on the next generation transit study. We're going to be asking for your feedback on two key areas on our vision and our goals moving forward to help frame our discussion. I'll give you a bit of background on the project. Transit is a key strategy for SACOG and is needed to achieve the required GHG reductions that are required in the current MTP. Without a robust and well-utilized regional transit system, we will not be able to meet these goals of the plan. Thus why we are taking on this important study at this time. The next generation transit study aims to articulate a long-term vision for the region's transit system over the next 20 years. And identify a set of both short and long-term strategies that will help us achieve that. These strategies will be informed by the feedback of the SACOG board, this committee, as well as two key stakeholder groups that are helping us. That is the Policy Advisory Committee, made up of generally voices that you don't hear in the transit discussion, the business community, advocates around the region, the development community, and also the Technical Advisory Committee, which is made up of our regional operators and transit providers. So SACOG kicked off this project this last summer with our consultant team, ARUP, and we are expected to complete this by July or August of this year. So we are moving fairly quickly through this project. We recently we're wrapping up the existing conditions report for the project, and I wanted to highlight a couple key challenges and a couple opportunities that were standouts in that work. First off, the region has seen a long general decline in transit ridership over the last few years. This has been really exacerbated by the current pandemic, with some of our operators seeing up to a 90% reduction in transit services or in ridership through this time. This is not across the board, but there are definitely been some key ridership drops, especially in the commute routes. And also long travel times. In general, a transit trip takes 4 to 6 times longer than a comparable vehicle trip in our region. With an average trip of about an hour on a transit trip in our region. We've identified some good key opportunities as well. We've had some regional successes in new transit models and service modes, most notably through microtransit with our region, through VIA in West Sacramento and SacRT's Smart Ride system. These new on-demand tech-enabled services have seen a lot less reduction in transit ridership than comparable fixed routes around the region. And also identified identified SACOG as a regional convener and a facilitator of innovation in our region. So we were happy to hear that. We'd like to continue that role moving forward. So the study, we are using 6 key focus areas to really help us frame our discussion on this project. They are transit network, interagency collaboration, user experience, land use, emerging mobility, and travelers. We understand these 6 focus areas, they are symbiotic in nature. They support each other. They are not distinct silos of initiatives, and we generally refer to them as a Venn diagram with our transit system kind of in the middle, because they meet in many areas, which will be illustrated shortly. So today we are really seeking your feedback on 2 key areas, and that is the vision for this project and the goals. The vision for this project really is contains 4 key themes, and that is reducing transit travel time in our region, equity, making sure that we are serving everybody in our region, increasing our ridership, and emerging technology. We want your feedback if these are the correct, is it the correct vision and themes moving forward. And 8 goals that we have identified for this project. And this vision and the goals, they really help frame our discussion and our identification of these long and short-term strategies moving forward. These goals are, we want a transit system that is attractive, it is equitable, it is context sensitive, user-friendly. We'd like to see increased cooperation with our transit operators, a cost-effective system, one that is financially sustainable and is ultimately safe. Each of these goals has a key performance indicator that it corresponds to. And these KPIs are really designed to be measurable to allow us to verify the success of our transit system moving forward, but also durable over time. They should last quite a long time. And you'll notice on the left-hand side, we have identified which of those primary 6 focus areas that each of these intersect with, and you can see by the multiple focus areas in each one of these how much of overlap that we are looking at in this project. This really concludes my remarks. I'll leave this slide up for discussion purposes if that helps, and I'm available for any questions, as are Autumn and Mike from our team. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. I see a question from Director Chenier.
Thanks, Karen.
Sure.
So Chris, thank you. I appreciate this, and I appreciate kind of coming from the different angles. The one thing that I don't see is economic impact.
Jay, we can't really hear you. You kind of muffled there.
I'm sorry. Is it better?
Yeah, better. Yeah, thank you.
The thing that's missing for me is the economic impact of transportation and thinking through how that affects what we do in the long run, where we put in and the systems itself. So I'm not sure where that comes in.
We could fit that into the vision statement if that works. But yeah, that's great feedback. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. Good point. Director Desmond?
Thank you. This is great. Really very exciting conversation, and it's going to be interesting to see what we come up with as a result of the kind of the new reality that we're living in. And James and I talked about this for a while yesterday, and I want to thank you again, James, for giving me a chance to talk with you one-on-one and ask the dumb questions that I don't want to ask in this forum, of course. So in my district, I think it's a unique transit needs because it's about 300,000 people in urban unincorporated area that most of whom don't have very good transit options. So the Smart RT, I think, is a great innovation. You mentioned that the Smart RT saw, and for those of you who don't know, Smart RT is an app-based. It's kind of to compete with the Uber and Lyft with a smaller size transit van. But you mentioned that you saw less of a decline in ridership in the Smart RT. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? What those numbers were compared to ridership on just more standard transit routes?
Sure, I might hand that over to Autumn for the specifics on that, because that came out directly out of the existing conditions report. Autumn, are you available to talk about that?
Yes, thank you for the question. It's a great question. I don't have the numbers in front of me. I can pull them out while we're doing it and put it in the chat. They're in our existing conditions report. What I can tell you is that we did see less of a steep decline in both the Smart Ride service and also the West Sacramento On Demand. So both of the VIA services in the region saw a smaller decline than we saw with the traditional fixed route transit. And we also saw when those services started to recover, they recovered more quickly. And in fact, for the West Sacramento example, we found that actually the ridership, when we last spoke with them, the numbers that we last saw, which were in the fall, was actually at its highest point ever. So even exceeding the levels before COVID. And so some really interesting trends that we're seeing. Some of that has to do with some expansions of service. In fact, SAC-RT has also expanded some of the service, some of the areas in which that are served with the Smart Ride. So there's a little bit of noise in the numbers, but overall we see, sorry.
I think maybe you're breaking up just for me, but I heard you break up. Go ahead.
I did hear some background noise too. Sorry about that. So overall, we are seeing an interesting trend where those services have recovered quite quickly. And I will see if I can pull some numbers out of the report and put those in the chat. Great,
thank you. I appreciate that. Something I talked to Henry Lee about when we met is that Smart RT. It's great. I'm a big fan, but it's inherently limited in my district because you can only travel within one community. So if you can only take a Smart RT ride within Carmichael or within Arden Arcade, you wouldn't be able to take it further away from your home. So that's something I'd want to talk about. And certainly in my district, urban, unincorporated, but very sprawling, really looking at bus rapid transit alternatives, which I think would be something that would really be effective for the communities that I represent. So thank you very much. I look forward to conversations about this.
Thank you, Director Desmond. And just for the record, there are no dumb questions. This is definitely, we're all learning together in this. Director Jennings, I see your hand.
Thank you, Chair Soon. I guess I'm looking at the 8 that you have here, and I think they're the right 8. In addition to the comments that are being made by my fellow committee members. But the one that's missing for me, and maybe I'm just not seeing it, is the reliability and dependability. How do we set a goal for making sure that from the customer's point of view and from transportation's point of view, that we can tell whether it's reliable and dependable?
I think that kind of gets into the attractive goal.
Everybody's me.
I'm sorry. You guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, I think that really gets into that goal of attractiveness, and it kind of overlaps into those kind of key focus areas of transit service, but also user experience and travelers to ensure that there is a consistent and reliable service. But we can definitely call that out, and maybe we can include that into a key performance indicator on service reliability. That might be able to help us better articulate that.
I think you would have to, because if I'm looking at attractive, I'm not thinking about reliability and dependability. That's not what my brain takes me to. But if it were within a key performance indicator somewhere where I could see it, then it would help me to be able to understand that we're looking for those indicators.
Great, thank you.
Wouldn't that also go under customer satisfaction part of user friendly?
Dave, couldn't hear you. Go ahead and say it again.
That it would go under the user-friendly goal with customer satisfaction. That's going to come back to reliability as well. Okay.
And the question was user-friendly, Chris.
If I may.
Yeah, Chris, I'm sorry. I got Chris Ledesma and then Paul Joyner and then Director Branscombe. I'll come to you. I saw that next. Chris Doherty, I'm sorry. Did you hear Director Chenier's follow up with that?
Yeah, if I can recap that just to make sure I got it correctly, that could also be included into the user-friendly number 4 goal. Is that correct? Thank you.
Okay, Director Ledesma.
Thank you. A lot of Chris's on the phone, so we'll try to keep.
Yeah, I know. I'm going to start using last names.
Good to see everyone. So, hey, Chris, good to see you, and a nice background, by the way. But I appreciate this, and I think Director Jennings kind of hit on something that I was kind of keen in on as well, is where kind of the reliability and dependability would fit in this, and I'd agree in concept that it could be in either the user-friendly or attractive nature, but it's kind of an important component because there's different measures or expectations built around the customer around that kind of the what would be reliable and dependable and versus what people would prefer to take. And I think that's some of our experience in West Sacramento, as you pointed out. Even though a bus stop is available either on Todd Hunter or one of the areas in our older parts of town, we are finding the use of VIA or even jump bikes pretty widespread in those areas as well. So I appreciate the feedback. I think we need to kind of call out that a little bit around the reliability, dependability. I did want to ask about, though, on just kind of an understanding on the focus areas and equitable, and in terms of you have some focus areas there around user experience and transit network and travelers. I'm just trying to understand what it is you're getting at in terms of those 3 focus areas and addressing the equitable nature of it.
Thank you. To recap, how are we folding equity into travelers?
Well, you have 3 focus areas on next to the equitable line there in number 2. And if I'm reading the key right, it's around transit network, user experience, and travelers. So I'm trying to understand what it is you're trying to get at by designating those.
So
I'm happy to jump in, Chris.
Yeah.
So in terms of equity, some of the key findings that we found in our existing conditions report were that we first looked at how well communities, environmental justice communities, are actually served by the existing network, and we did find that in terms of service, they actually fare pretty well. That the bus stops are there are routes there. Where we really saw the disparities were around how long it takes to travel. So and some of this has to do with the fact that many low-income people are transit dependent. They don't have a car, they don't have a choice, and so if your trip takes 5 to 6 times longer to get anywhere than it would if you have a car, that creates a disparity. And so people not having an option of getting to their destination quickly is a real concern. So we see that, you know, improving the transit network as far as improving the speed of transit and the frequency of transit to get those trip times down is an important equity consideration. And then also travel cost being an important piece. You know, if your income is lower, then a transit fare can feel like a lot of money, or even a monthly pass, et cetera. So thinking about how do we make sure that everybody is paying a reasonable amount of their income to ride the network or to travel. And then the third and final thing is around, you know, new mobility, shared mobility, whether it's the VIA or the jump bike or other these innovative modes where we're working with private operators have a tendency to not put those options in low-income communities. They have a tendency to focus on more affluent communities. So thinking about how do we make sure that that low-income people, environmental justice communities have access to those modes as well as everyone else. So those are kind of the three areas that we are really focused on when it comes to equity.
Well, and I agree, because you brought up something that we've learned in West Sacramento about, particularly around VIA and jump, is in terms of where their ridership. We just talked about this at our council meeting a couple of weeks ago with our mobility action plan, that the share of trips that are coming from our older parts of our older neighborhoods in Bright and Broderick. And I think that is one of the encouraging things we found is by that it is getting in those areas and having that focus there. We didn't force it. It was just naturally there, and we made it available to them because of the app-based nature of it. Demand was there. So again, I appreciate that, and the notion that you brought up around what it means to provide that service, because what we've learned as well is the freedom it gave a lot of people to move around the city, from taking a 45-minute bus ride to get to downtown Sacramento for a job versus maybe reduced to 20. And I think that is a very important measure of how we look at this. So just want to make sure that we underscore that point when it comes to the equitable nature of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Ledesma. I have Director Joyner, then followed by Director Branscombe.
Actually, Chair, Director Branscombe has been waving his hand much in advance of my hitting my little icon here. So I'll defer to him and I'll go after him if that's all
okay,
right.
thank you. Yeah, apologize, Director Branscombe. I'm not seeing everyone, so I'm just looking at the hands that are coming up. Go ahead, Director Branscombe.
It's okay, I'm patient. What I'm looking at here is the challenge of optimizing within 8 parameters. And trying to do that simultaneously sounds like a challenge beyond the scope of my brain and my experience. What I'm thinking of is, and I see these things, these parameters listed 1 through 8. It would be interesting to whittle it down without eliminating, but as a first cut, looking at the top 3 parameters. I think, well, maybe it's a little bit more, but cost from both sustainability and cost effectiveness on a cost per mile matters. I don't see time. Is time listed on one of these? I don't see, oh, that must be under user friendly. Time is obviously driving this, time and accessibility. Man fears time, time only fears the Great Pyramids, and it's been said time is the new currency, and that is clearly a trigger on the lower ridership on the fixed routes. But I think I don't know how, I wouldn't know how to judge a proposal based on these without overlaying some curves and optimizing certainly within the most important, which would be connected to money, and then see how optimizing within the financial curves affects the other factors under consideration. I look at every one of these things, every one of these factors, and they are important. But for the life of me, I'm trying to figure out how you're going to approach this in coming up with a a first real hard recommendation on it. And I'd be interested in your thinking on that.
Autumn, do you want to talk a little bit about how we're going to take this and move it into the strategy development? Because I think that'll probably answer that question.
Yeah, happy to. That's a great question. And we are very much in the phase currently of generating a host of strategies, and we're essentially starting with a very kind of broad set of strategies focused on starting with each of these 6 different areas that are identified with the icons. But as Chris talked about, ultimately we see it as a Venn diagram. There's a lot of overlap. Sorry about that. Between the areas, and the ultimate set of strategies will be, will be one set of strategies. But so we're taking these key performance indicators and then doing what we call a multi-criteria analysis, where we'll evaluate our strategies according to how they perform against these different indicators, so that we can, and we're not going to do this in a super quantitative way. A lot of it will be kind of qualitative based on what data is available, to sort of say, okay, if we take a strategy that's like, expanding via service to, X percentage of the region, how would that then fare against each of these key performance indicators that we've identified? And ideally, the strategies that we would then lift up are those that kind of perform the best across a variety of indicators, so that we're not just, so that we're, really finding those strategies that do give us the most bang for the buck, if you will. As part of that analysis, we'll be looking at it, comparing against KPIs, but as Chris also mentioned, we're going to be getting feedback from our policy advisory committee, our technical advisory committee, made up of the transit operators, to really get their thoughts on which of these strategies they think are the most powerful and effective.
Thank you, Autumn. Director Joyner.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Let me apologize in advance. I'm on the tail end of a bad cold here, so if I cough or the voice goes, I apologize. Just a real quick question, I think probably for Autumn, again in the area of equitability. I'm just trying to get some clarification on what it is you're meaning by travel costs as shares of income. You're not actually, I don't believe you're actually talking about pricing based on income and collecting data on people's income and adjusting their fare price, are you? And that's a very, very big project, if that's what you're talking about.
It's a great question, and you're right. This is a huge undertaking to kind of, depending on how far you want to go with this measure. I think that there's, in terms of how we look at it, there's a couple different approaches we can take when we talk about reducing the share of people's income that they spend on travel. One is lowering fares across the board, and trying to make sure that we're sort of right-sizing fares, if you will, relative to the people just overall who are using it. And interestingly, we have some data that showed that most of the operators made transit free when COVID hit, and that was in part to avoid minimizing contact between drivers and passengers in terms of having to pay your fares. But there was some little bumps that we saw in terms of when transit was free. Actually people started, there was a little jump in terms of people riding it more, and that's not just true in the SACOG region, that's been true elsewhere. So a little bit of a natural experiment in what happens when you lower the cost of transit, that even though a transit fare may not seem like that much, it can mean a lot to people who are on a fixed income. So that's one approach. The other approach actually is doing something like what we call like a means-based fare, where people who are, say, eligible for PG&E care service, people who are eligible for other sort of discounts based on income, are then eligible to have a discounted transit passes, or discounted having discounts on their Connect card, that they can use. MTC actually in the Bay Area has currently got a pilot where they're doing this for their Clipper card, which is the equivalent of the Connect card. People who are, meet a certain income eligibility basically get a 50% discount, that just is pegged to their card. And so whenever they use it to use a service, they automatically get half off of the fare. So this is a direction that that a lot of agencies are looking at, and the fact that you already have the Connect card in place means that there may be some opportunities to kind of leverage that to do something in that arena.
All right, thank you. That's helpful. Where I was coming from was my family for many, many years has had low income apartments that are income-based rent. And so the entire complex can have different rental prices for each individual unit based on income. And when I take that by extension and apply it to transit, that becomes unwieldy. So I appreciate that places some reasonable controls on how you approach that. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Director Joyner. Are there any other directors? Maybe I'm not seeing any hands up. Okay, hearing none. I have a couple questions as well, and comments. Ms. Stordia, I was looking at the financially sustainable and cost effective, and perhaps financially sustainable is a little more appropriate. I think that would be prudent to include in the vision statement. And then as we look at, we're talking next generation transit. I've seen, we've talked about in the past this model where, things such as advertising might be on, in Uber and Lyft vehicles when passengers are getting service, and maybe something like that could also be revenue generators beyond fees. So I think it's important we look for ways to make transit financially sustainable that may not be associated with again, fees or subsidies from federal and state government. And then connectivity, I think regional connectivity is important. That destination of folks getting, as we become more mobile in our region, I think being able to get from Marysville to Elk Grove or Davis to El Dorado Hills, I think those things we need to keep in mind for that next generation. And then finally, just as we look at equity, that ridership, maybe these routes, maybe that service needs to be tailored more if your average individual is median income individual isn't necessarily utilizing transit, they're using still using cars, then maybe we need to focus on the population that doesn't have access to a vehicle or a car, and they're reliant more on there. And so maybe we should be looking at through that equity lens and providing greater service opportunities for those individuals, which would then potentially increase ridership. And then so those are my thoughts. And then I also have one more question about the outreach we're doing for, you mentioned some transit groups, but we received a comment about, at least from one transit advocacy group, that may not be at the table right now. And so I'm hoping, Mr. Doherty, you could touch upon how we're doing outreach to folks that are definitely have transit concerns and would like to weigh in.
Sure. So as I mentioned, we have two kind of primary stakeholder groups for this project, and that is the Technical Advisory Committee, which is made up of our transit operators and those providing transit services in this region, and also the Policy Advisory Committee, which it kind of brings in those voices that don't normally get asked about transit. This is the business community. We have members of GSAC, we have members of the SAC Metro Chamber there. We have developer voices there, and we have transit advocates also in that space, as well as disability advocates and others. If there is somebody, you said you'd gotten a comment, I'm happy to, if you want to forward that to me, I'm happy to reach out to them directly. If it's something that they would like to do, I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, Mr. Dan Allison from Sacramento Transit Advocates and Writers,
okay.
Acronym STAR. And he mentioned other organizations were not contacted. So just want to ensure that, we do some broad outreach on this.
We currently do have representatives on the PAC from SMART, which is the Sacramento Metro Advocates for Rail and Transit, which are,
sure.
So I'm happy to reach out to STAR and discuss that with them.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, and just folks, my camera's off because I seem to be having internet difficulties too. So it's one of those mornings. Director Bradford, I see your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Chair Soon. I believe Autumn already answered this question, but I just want to confirm that I did hear the answer. On previous slides, we talked about the importance of availability and trip time being competitive with driving. And it appears to me that that's addressed here in the second bullet under equitable. And I believe that's what you stated, but I just wanted to confirm that. Okay, I see a shaking of a head there. So,
okay.
And then just a comment to follow up on what Chair Soon said related to that exact thing. You know, I know there's some individuals that, you know, are completely dependent on transit. Then we have other individuals in the community that have a choice whether or not to use transit. And I think those two items really impact what choice those individuals make. I mean, I can speak from personal experience. When I was commuting from Plumas Lake to downtown Sacramento, transit was very convenient and time competitive with driving my car. And so I chose to take transit downtown. When my place of employment later moved to Rancho Cordova, taking transit from Plumas Lake to Rancho Cordova was not even close to time competitive with driving, even when I factored in sitting in lots and lots of traffic. And so I no longer rode transit. And so that if we want to increase ridership, and I think we've all said this, so it's no secret, but that is very important, I think, to focus on that. So thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Director Bradford.
Well, thank you, Gary, for that plug. Clearly, we need a lot more transit investment in Rancho Cordova in order to make that more possible. But I mean, seriously, you know, we're kind of an interesting case study there because we've got light rail running from one end of town to the other. We've got the region's largest private sector job base, and you can't get from light rail to those jobs using transit, not very reasonably. The system is just not designed for that, doesn't work for that. We're not able to deploy enough resource to do it. So virtually no one does it. If it doesn't work here, you know, it's difficult to see a path forward for where it works. So this sort of work is really important, but it's particularly important that we do it without blinders. And, you know, the way you presented it here, I think is important. You're not letting certain interest groups drive the discussion or the indicators. Because in the past, you know, we could set out to do some nice reforms at regional transit and just be hammered in, you know, by those interest groups and to basically not being able to change anything. And so you were left with basically a broken system that doesn't serve the vast majority of our population. There's an opportunity now with technology to do something differently. I think West Sacramento has shown the way in a lot of ways here. It's really exciting what's been done there and what you've seen elsewhere in the country. So I'm hopeful, I'm very hopeful we can find solutions, not just for Rancho Cordova, but for other communities as well. So we can actually have functional transit, but only if we can do this sort of analysis without boxing ourselves into basically what we've already done.
Yeah, well, thank you, Vice Chair Sander. Yeah, and also again with the pandemic and people, you know, working from home, people being allowed to, you know, move from the Bay Area, the technology companies, you know, that all of a sudden, I think there's a lot of higher potential for transit to be used in greater distances than we previously imagined. Mr. Corliss, I know you wanted to say a few words too.
Thanks, Chair Soon. Look, I think this has been a really good discussion, and I was, if I succeeded in trying to encourage you and applaud you on the questions on the previous item, you know, can we do this differently? You know, can we think outside the box? And this is the effort to try to do that, right? And I think even again for some of our newer board members, you heard Chris Doherty set this item up, basically saying, we have to have some alternative to people driving alone for all kinds of reasons, for equity, for economy, for the success of our region. Our MTPSCS is dependent on having an alternative to people driving alone. And at the same time, you know, we have probably never seen as many challenges in the transit industry as we currently have. The pandemic is the latest accelerant to that. So how can we develop a visionary, exciting plan which is next generation transit, right? That allows an alternative that meets these 8 goals and KPIs, and really helps a lot of our existing operators transition in what I would call from sort of bus and rail providers to mobility brokers, because that's really the model I think we're after. And it's not a one size fits all. It's going to be very technology forward, but it has to also be very thoughtful and cautious around equity, making sure we don't take away service from the people that are dependent upon it to give it to others. I think it's going to take a very sort of new and different approach to this whole concept. And you probably, many of you heard me say, we just cannot afford to extend light rail all over this region. We just can't do it. And I worry sometimes that we use that. I'm a big fan of rail transit, but I worry sometimes we think about that as the one solution. It's a very, in some ways, it's its own technology answer, right? Which is not the only answer. And I do think the West Sacramento experiments, and look, my hat's off to RT for being very innovative with Smart Ride, with their partnership with Uber, with jump bikes and mobility hubs. So a lot more of this to come. And then again, just for our new directors, I just want to end by saying you'll hear a little bit more. In fact, our Policy and Innovation Committee will get an update on Monday from Adrian Moretz on our Civic Lab program, our Mobility Accelerator. So we're trying to create a sandbox in some ways, both for our transit agencies to be in, for some of our private sector partners like VIA to come in, so we can problem solve together to build capacity to really be thinking about the future and getting ahead of some of these disruptive curves. So I hope that's a little bit helpful. I really appreciate the engagement on this topic, because it is absolutely critical we come up with a vision here that has you all shaping it, but really is something that can help us meet our long range goals. So thanks, appreciate it.
Thank you, James. And James or Chris Doherty, what are the next steps? So with these comments, will you guys come back around or take it back to the group, then come back to us, or?
So we are meeting with our policy advisory committee and technical advisory committees this month to go over the kind of a deep dive into these kind of key focus areas. That's going to educate and inform the draft deliverables and the strategy development. And we'll be bringing that back to you in probably May or June for your review and discussion on that. Okay, fantastic. If I don't hear any other, I don't see any other hands up either. Are there any comments, Jessica, or questions from the public?
No public comment right now.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, if that's see none, I'll move to the next item. Thank you, everybody. It's great work. Love the comments as well. The next item is our status of the state and regional active transportation program competitions. Mr. Cacciatore.
Good morning, and I will start with sharing my presentation.
Okay.
So for those who are not familiar with it or would like this opportunity to be reminded of it, the Active Transportation Program is a statewide funding source that's made up of state and federal funds in support of projects and programs that will increase biking and walking. SACOG has a portion of these funds to distribute throughout our 6-county region, and it has a very unique selection process in the ATP where projects first compete for statewide funding, and anything that is unsuccessful from that program then has the option to compete in the SACOG managed funding program. So there's a difference in the funding available through each one naturally. The statewide program has $241 million to distribute this round, and the SACOG round will have $11.7 million to distribute. So I'm here to provide the update of what has happened with the first step of that sequential funding process. We had 25 projects competing from the SAGHOG region in the state competition, and 4 of them are recommended for funding. This is great news that there are these 4 projects in Sacramento, Yolo, and El Dorado counties that'll bring $16.2 million of funding into the region to make very needed active transportation improvements. State ATP continues to be a very competitive program. This is a chart that's showing you how the 25 projects submitted from the SAGHOG region scored. And you'll see this blue bar up here, which marks the very high minimum score needed for a project to be awarded funding. They had a cutoff of 92 points out of 100. So my apologies or my sincere regrets to every project that scored under that amount, which is still a very high score for many of these and demonstrates the intense need and support for these projects and the potential that they have, but there's simply not that much funding in the state ATP. This is due to a couple of different reasons. Over the past 2 cycles, California Transportation Commission staff has been pushing towards more, as they call them, transformative projects. So they're looking at larger infrastructure investments that will do more to completely change the face of active transportation in an area. And this has had a couple of different impacts, such as an increase in the average funding award. It is up $1.2 million higher than it was last time. So the average funding award was, I believe, at the 6 million range or something like that. And when you only have $241 million and some projects are being recommended for as much as $30 million, you have you're able to fund fewer projects. They only funded 41 projects in the whole statewide competition this time, which is less than 10% success rate for those that applied for funding. I'd also like to point out, we have, you can see the scoring breakdowns across different project sizes here. Medium projects did not fare as well this round as both a smaller and larger region or larger infrastructure projects from the SAGHOG region. We had 2 small infrastructure projects recommended and 2 large infrastructure projects. And our medium infrastructure projects, while still serving a very needed active transportation improvements and serving the residents, they just were not able to crack that 90-point score. The highest one was in the mid-80s. So if we're trying to figure out part of what that is, it might be related to how similar the scoring is between large infrastructure projects and medium infrastructure projects. But we'll be doing a more detailed dive into the scoring breakdowns for these projects to see what needs there might be for specific technical assistance programs or what other parts might help us be able to increase our performance in the state ATP. So with that recommendation of those state projects, we now look at what's coming up with the recommendation for the regional ATP funds of 11.7 million. This is a recap of what was approved last May with the region-specific policy framework for active transportation program. So it takes the basic outline of what the state active transportation program guidelines say the program must do, and then adds our regional focus on it. This is partly through adjusting the scoring criteria or weighting in different ways, but we also add new scoring criteria around how the project is going to achieve greenhouse gas reductions and also how the project supports economic prosperity. Part of our regional competition is always, or is also about the requirement of non-active transportation program funding. This is to leverage our very small amount of ATP funds, since we only have 11.7 million. And as I just noted in the prior discussion points, the projects are getting larger. We also have a regional policy goal of identifying a minimum of 35% goal for projects that will benefit environmental justice residents. And this is something that is carried over from the state, but then with our extra regional commitment to how we can proactively address the inequities that are related to transportation and how that impacts the access to opportunities for residents in the lower income or communities of color. And to go a little bit deeper into how we look at defining disadvantaged communities, there are a number of definitions that are provided by the state using statewide tools such as state average, median household incomes, environmental exposures that you would see with tools like CalEnviroscreen. Since this funding program involves Safe Routes to School funding, it also looks at the percent of students that receive free or reduced price meals. And then a new definition for this most recent round of active transportation program is using the Healthy Places Index, which looks to the social determinants of health. There's also, this has been part of the active transportation program since the beginning. Tribal lands are included in the definitions for disadvantaged communities. And of course, we use regional metrics such as those thresholds that are used in our long-range transportation plan to identify environmental justice communities. So with that, this is mostly a preview of what's coming up next. On March 24th, the state is expected to adopt those 4 projects as part of their larger funding recommendation with the State Active Transportation Program. So that will be on the March 24th California Transportation Commission agenda. And then on April 1st, we will look at the regional ATP funding recommendation here at the Transportation Committee. And with the 4 projects that are recommended for funding through the state ATP, those projects are then removed from the regional ATP competition. But I would note that there are some projects that overlap between the regional active transportation program and the concurrent 4-county regional funding program that is also being conducted by SACOG at this time. So you will see some overlap in the projects listed on both of those programs. And with that, are there any questions?
Thank you, Victoria. Any questions from the directors? Glad to see at least we have 4 projects qualifying. I have a question from Director Desmond. Go ahead.
Thank you, Victoria. I appreciate the work on this, the information. Can you explain to me a little bit about the solicitation process for these proposals? I mean, I'm just looking at the projects that were proposed, and so what? Can you just describe that a little bit for me? There's very few from Sacramento County, and it just strikes me, and this is obviously a discussion I'll have with Sacramento County DOT, but it's pretty striking to me that the county, which has about 600,000 people, gets a very small percentage of this, but also very few projects were submitted, it looks like, from Sacramento County. So can you explain that to me a little bit?
So are you more interested in how the projects go through the state or through the region?
Through the region.
Okay, so
I guess the solicitation process. I mean, what's your process for trying to get applications for these projects?
our process for getting projects through this involves a lot of SACOG to local agency outreach, and we provide information about what the program is looking to achieve and provide technical assistance on what is going to help a project compete well, because there is such a high bar at the state competition. And I think that high bar at the state competition carries over into being a very high bar at the regional competition. And so some people look at focusing their efforts into what they feel will be the most likely to be competitive for the program. So even we had multiple conversations with Sacramento County staff as the state active transportation program guidelines were being developed, and offering technical assistance to them as they worked on their applications. But they do also recognize that every application they develop does take a set amount of effort, either on staff or hiring consultants to draft the application. And so they really look to focus their efforts on what they think is going to be the most successful. I do not know if there is how to say, I'm fairly confident that everyone was aware of the opportunities in front of them with this program through both their own very good tracking of grant opportunities. This is the 5th cycle of ATP, but some of our jurisdictions have developed a pretty good sense of what is going to be able to compete relatively well in the state and the regional program based on the scoring criteria.
No, that's very helpful. And I know this is certainly will be part of my continuing education in my talks with James about this, because there's always other factors involved in this. So I appreciate that. It just, I know just in the county, there's such a huge need for projects like this. So this is just something I need to be engaged in and make sure that Sacramento County is taking advantage of opportunities available to it. So I appreciate that. And I'm sure I'll follow up with you, James, or we'll talk more about it.
And Director Desmond, I know Victoria does too. We appreciate these questions, right? Thank you for being engaged and asking great questions. I just, maybe to reiterate Victoria said, especially for the statewide ATP, as Victoria said, it's a lot of work, right? It's staff time. You have to put applications together. Am I going to win? Am I not going to win? You saw her excellent graphics. That said, I would also say Victoria's leading one of our many other efforts around this on our Regional Parks and Trails Initiative, which is, if you looked at just our trails, and we talked about this the other day, Director Desmond, it's a patchwork quilt that starts and stops. There are big holes and gaps. Many of those gaps are in disadvantaged communities. And so I guess what I would just say is, if we're truly going to have a regional approach, if we're going to have networks of things that connect, whether it's transit or trails or roads, we are here to help your staff figure out how can we get competitive at the state level, right? As well as how we can, how you all at the local level can compete for SACOG funds. I personally believe we'll see a lot more of these kinds of opportunities at the federal level. I just think it's good to ask the questions about how can we basically help your staff, put the effort in to write some competitive applications, and in the big picture, how can we help get the resources into those communities that really need it, and especially that are disadvantaged. And let me just say something else on disadvantaged communities, because we had a big discussion around this yesterday just on the ATP side. it's really, really important both to advance our racial equity work at SACOG, to be competitive for grants. If you look at some of the federal criteria that's coming out, like for lots of reasons, we really have to get good at this. We have to build this muscle. We've got to figure out what are the benefits to disadvantaged communities, engage those disadvantaged communities. So more to come on this. But in terms of that competition, in terms of actually getting our profile up and our head up and being competitive, we, I think, have to do some very genuine groundwork with all of you, with all of your staffs, but also with many of the disadvantaged communities that exist, by the way, throughout the region, throughout all 6 counties. So.
Thank you, Jan. No, I appreciate that. I'm certainly looking at this, the macro lens and the micro lens, in my district. And I'm the first thing I think about when you mention disadvantaged communities. There are an awful lot of communities, and older communities in Sacramento County, where there are no contiguous sidewalks, and there are so many kids that are now walking to school or trying to walk to school in very unsafe conditions on roadways that were never designed for that level of traffic, that level of pedestrian traffic or vehicular traffic. So that's the first thing I think about. But I look forward to talking to you more about this, about making sure at least my jurisdiction takes advantage of opportunities. So thank you.
Thank you, Director Desmond. And James, it's not said enough. I mean, you and your staff provide such great support to all our jurisdictional staff for these applications, and we greatly appreciate that. Are there any other questions from the directors? I don't see any hands going up. Jessica, is anyone from the public have any questions or comments?
No public comment.
Okay, thank you very much. This is also an informational item. So I think that'll bring this to the end. Thank you, Victoria. And are there any comments from directors on other matters? Okay, seeing none. I think before we adjourn, James, do we have is there a lunch? Is there a lunch meeting today for workshop? Did you want to talk about that?
Yeah, actually, maybe I'll kick this to Matt, both for the lunch, but also for the just what's upcoming in April.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great. Well,
thank you.
Great. Thank you, James and Chair Soon. I think one thing that's just a nice compliment to that excellent summary you just got from Victoria about the active transportation program. Those recommendations for staff awards will be coming in April. Also, we are making good progress on our regional funding round for this year. Our program manager, Garrett Ballard-Rosa, is doing a great job leading this initial application review. It's being done by multiple working groups, and these working groups are engaging both expertise from SACOG staff and our external partners. Now we are moving into this month is really our final project selection phase. We have some challenging but doable work ahead. We have over 100 applications requesting funds, and our available budget is limited. A total of nearly $440 million is being requested by sponsors, but our budget is just under $200 million. So we will be continuing this work over March and releasing our staff recommendations, we believe, the final week of the month. The next week is our April Transportation Committee meeting. Well, you'll have an opportunity to review our award recommendations and take action on which ones go forward to the board for a full vote later in that month. I'll just finally close by saying just our program manager, Garrett, is with us this morning, and he's available for any further questions you may have on the remaining funding round work. I just know over the course of this meeting, we've got some chats and some interest in what's going on with that.
Thanks, Matt. Any questions from folks? Okay.
And then, as James mentioned, one of the things, we welcome both veterans and new board members to join us for a workshop we're going to have over the lunch hour, talking a bit about how do you get your transportation project funded. We really stand ready to help you, both your staff and your visions come to life. So please join us if you can afford the time. We'll start that shortly after the MISS meeting ends, and you'll have a chance also to get to know some of the transportation team leaders that I work with every day that are going to be very helpful in 2021 and beyond in helping realize your visions.
Thanks, Matt. It's very informative, and even if you've had it before, it's always good to review because it's so complex too. Okay, unless there's any other questions from the directors, I'm going to say have a good day, have a good afternoon. Hope to see you at noon. Meeting adjourned. Thank you, everybody. Take care.
Thank you.
Everybody, good to see you all.